You've just finished knitting that top-down sweater and you try it on. Everything is looking absolutely perfect until you lift your underarm and you see the big gaping hole. That happens really often in top-down seamless sweaters, but there are some things you can do to minimize the holes at the underarm, and that's what we're talking about in this video. Hey nerdy knitter, Tanya here. I'm a certified knitting instructor and a master hand knitter, and I believe knitting is a form of self-care. You can take time for yourself and your creative hobbies like knitting, still create beautiful garments that you love to wear. Now, one of those garments is a top-down seamless sweater, which is a very popular construction method with good reason. Instead of having to knit all these different pieces and take all this time to sew them up, you cast on at the neck and you knit down to the underarm, you divide the body and the sleeves, and you knit the sleeves and the body. Then you just have to weave in some ends and maybe some other little finishing details depending on the pattern. But it's pretty straightforward, but it does have some drawbacks. And one of those drawbacks is after you've cast on for the body and you come back and you have to pick up stitches for the sleeve, there is a big gap between the stitches that were on hold on the top and the cast on stitches underneath. And in that gap, we end up with holes. It's very common. Happens a lot, but what can we do to minimize that? There are some things we can do. So we're going to address those fixes we can do while we're moving stitches around, fixes we can do as we're picking up our sleeve stitches, lots of different methods that you can test to see how it works on your next top-down seamless sweater. So before you can actually fix anything that's going on here, we need to understand what's going on. We cast on at the neck, we knit the length of the yoke to the underarm, and then it's time to divide the body and the sleeves. So if you've knit this before, then you know what's happening here. You're sliding some sleeve stitches to waste yarn or barber cord, a spare needle. You're casting on some stitches at the underarm and knitting across the front or the back, and repeating that for the other shoulder, putting those sleeve stitches on waste yarn, casting on stitches at that underarm, and then joining the whole body in the round and knitting around. Then when you come back to work on those sleeves, we have to slide those sleeve stitches back onto a needle. We have to pick up the stitches at the underarm, join that all in the round, and start knitting the sleeve. But what happens is we end up with a gap. In between those two locations on either side, there's quite a large space. And that's where we want to do something to help minimize any holes or gaps. The space between those stitches that are put on hold and that cast on stitches, where you have to pick up stitches for the sleeve in that cast on edge. But between that pickup line and the stitches that were on hold, there is a gap. So that is the area that we're going to focus on to try to reduce any holes or gaps or anything that's going to happen. It's going to happen right there. Okay, now we know the location where we're going to have to pay attention and do some little tricks to fix any holes that might happen there. The next thing to discuss is the cast on edge and how many stitches you have to pick up from that cast on edge. So when you pick up stitches, you have to understand how to read your knitting first of all. You're looking for a V. A V is a stitch if you're working in stockinette. You're going to insert into the center of that V and pull up the new stitch to create that pickup stitch. You're going to look at all of the V's that are along that cast on edge. But there's something that happens here with knitted fabric. When you cast on top down in that direction. And then when you turn it over in the other direction to pick up stitches, you're going to find that you have an extra column of stitches along that pickup edge. This is the nature of knitted fabrics. When you think of a provisional cast on, you can cast on, work in two different directions, and it's going to look seamless along that cast on point. That's actually what we're going for when we're picking up stitches at the underarm. But what happens is, let's say you cast on 15 stitches at the underarm when you're working the body. When you come back to pick up stitches and you've turned that around because now it's facing the other way, you're going to pick up stitches from that cast on edge and you count the number of spaces where you can pick up stitches. Suddenly there are 16 spaces. That's just the way knitted fabric works. You've worked in one direction, you flip it over to pick up stitches to go in the other direction, and somehow there's another column of stitches there. This is absolutely normal, should be expected. Now, a lot of patterns don't say anything about this. They tell you to cast on 15 stitches, and then when you come back to pick up stitches, they tell you to pick up 15 stitches without accounting for that extra space. So that's the first thing to be aware of. Now, you might have a pattern that actually does account for that. It tells you you cast on 15 stitches. It's telling you to pick up 16. So it's accounted for that extra column that you get when you flip that knitting over. If it doesn't, you're going to cast on an extra stitch. So all you have to do is go back and look through your pattern, see how many stitches you cast on at the underarm, compare that to the amount of stitches or the number of stitches that they want you to pick up. Are they the same? You're going to want to pick up one more. Or they might have already accounted for that one extra stitch. So either way, you're going to pick up one extra stitch compared to what you cast on. And we can get rid of that stitch later on, but this is going to give us a seamless line across the bottom, which is what we're going for. When we pick up stitches in those V's, we're going to pick up each stitch along that edge. So the first thing I like to do is count it out and put a marker at each edge so I can tell, okay, these are the stitches that I'm going to be picking up within. Look at those columns of V's, find the one at the top right along that cast on edge. That's where you're going to insert and draw up your new stitch from the center of that stitch. So I like to put a marker at each end, and I know this is how many between this space are the number of stitches I need to pick up. Now, one of the things I like to do after I have my sleeve stitches on there and I'm about to pick up the bars and the cast on stitches, pick up my stitches from there, I look at that area where I know I'm going to have some gaps, and I take the tip of my needle and I see if I can move some of that excess yarn, because sometimes like where you're splitting and you're working in two different directions, the stitches like start to separate and pull apart and you get long bars in there. So use the tip of your needle first and see if you can like pull up on the legs of the stitches on either side and move some of that excess yarn to the stitches on either side. Do that first, just lightly, to see if you can like readjust some of the size of that space between the stitches that were cast on and the stitches that were on hold. That's the first thing I like to do. Just see if I can remove some of the excess there where things started to like get spread out. So now we're fully aware. We've got all of the information we need. We know how many stitches we have to pick up. Our sleeve stitches should be back on their needle, and we're ready to take that needle and pick up our stitches. But before we do that, there's that gap we have to deal with. We have two gaps, one on either side of that cast on edge and those sleeve stitches. So we have our needle ready. We need to do something in that gap. So if you're like me and you've placed a marker, you know where that first column of pickup stitches is. In between that space and that last cast on stitch, we're going to pick up 2 running bars along that area, and we're going to twist them closed with the stitch to either side when we come back around to them. Not yet. For now, we're just going to pick up that running bar. So you want to do this twice. You're going to pick up 2 running bars, and I like to put a marker right in the center between each of them so I know this is the location of those 2 running bars, and I'm going to work them together with the stitch that's right beside it to close up any holes. Now you can pick up your stitches. If you placed markers to mark the location of where you need to pick them up, you can remove that first one and go right into that first V at that top of that column under that cast on edge, pick up your first stitch and continue doing that across. Now you're going to have to place a beginning of round marker. Most likely it's going to be in this location at the center of the underarm. You'll be off by a stitch perhaps if you're casting on or picking up an extra stitch. So you'll have an extra stitch somewhere. You just want to pay attention to that as well, because if you're casting on an extra one, then we're going to want to decrease that later on. So pick up your stitches, placing a marker at the pretty much halfway point. You might have an extra stitch in there, and then you're going to continue to the other side, that other gap along the edge of the pickup line and the sleeve stitches that are on hold. Then you're going to repeat the process for picking up those running bars. You're going to pick up that first one just after your last pickup stitch, place a marker there, and then pick up the other running bar. And then stop right here, because this is when we're going to start actually decreasing and closing up those holes. So now we're going to start actually decreasing. We want to get rid of these running bars. What we're going to do is twist them closed, and we're going to work them as a decrease with the stitch that's right beside them. But there is a key to how you're going to do this. You don't want this running bar sitting on top. So you want it to be hidden underneath the stitch that's beside it. So that's how I like to use that marker. I've got the bar on one side, and the first one we're going to do, we have the marker, then there's that running bar, and then there's that stitch, and that stitch is what we want to sit on top. So our two options for decreasing are either knit two together or SSK. Which one's going to get that stitch sitting on top? Obviously, it's a knit two together because you're entering that second stitch first and then knitting it together with the first stitch, and that first stitch ends up underneath. That's exactly what we want to happen here. But before we do that, look at that running bar. You want to treat it sort of like a make one. You want it to twist closed. So which way does that running bar have to sit? So when you knit into it, it's gonna twist closed. We want it to be leaning off to the right. You've picked up that bar, you might have to maneuver it so that leading leg is leading off to the right. So when you enter the second stitch and then enter that running bar, you'll knit them together and it'll twist that bar closed. Now, if things still aren't looking great, there is one other thing you can try right here, but I use this one with caution. I do use it, but I like to check it because sometimes it can actually make things a little tight and it gives it a little odd shape in that space, but you can try it if it feels like there's going to be a big gap. Put your stitch back on the needle, like take out that knit two together and put the running bar back on your needle. Actually, you can drop it for a second because what you're going to do is pick up the running bar that is underneath that one, the second running bar. You're going to insert your needle from top to bottom and then turn the needle to twist that bar. And then put the first running bar back on your needle and use your fingertip to sort of maneuver that twisted bar over the new bar. And this can make things a little tighter in that area. Now, if you want to try this, I suggest you save it for the second stitch because we have two decreases to work in this area. So do just your plain knit two together. When you come back around, if it feels like it's going to be a big gap, then do this little twisted stitch on that second decrease, and that will help close things up. But only if this first decrease isn't working. So that's the caveat there. You can try this, but sometimes it can be a little too tight and make things a little bit worse actually, and it draws a little more attention to that area than you want. So we've worked our decrease, we've twisted that bar with our stitch. We're going to knit across all of the sleeve stitches right to that one stitch before the marker. So we've got the running bar, we've got the marker, the running bar, and then one stitch before. We want to stop right there. And obviously our first decrease was a knit two together. This time it's going to be an SSK because we want that bar to sit underneath. And if we knit two together, those last two stitches before the marker, it's going to sit on top. So we need to do an SSK. So we can slip our first stitch knitwise to change the stitch mount, and then look at the way you've picked up that running bar. This time you want it to be leaning off to the left. So however you've picked it up, you might have to move it so the leading leg is leaning left. So when you knit into the back of it with that SSK, it's going to twist it closed. And then you can slip your first stitch back and knit them together through the back legs, and that bar will be twisted underneath the first stitch. Then you can remove the marker. We're going to repeat this process. We just did an SSK so you can see what's going to come. Now you have to do a knit two together. So adjust that running bar if you have to. Look at what you have going on there. If you twist that close, is that going to be enough to close up the gap? And then you're going to do that knit two together. So make sure that running bar is sitting on the needle so it's leaning off to the right. So actually look at it, like just look at that stitch. Like if you're going to insert to knit into it, you want to make sure it's going to twist. You don't want to like insert into the center and have a big gappy hole there. You want it to twist closed. So then work it together with that stitch, and then you're going to work across your picked up stitches. So which side has that extra stitch that we cast on? That it might be before your marker, it might be after your beginning of round marker. So wherever that is, somewhere around that beginning of round marker, you're going to do another knit two together just to get rid of that extra stitch. So then the last thing to do is close up that last gap. So we did a knit two together, an SSK, a knit two together, and this last one is going to be an SSK. You can tell that just by looking at it. We've got a stitch, we have the bar, and then we have the marker. And we want that bar, that running bar, to be underneath our stitch. So think about your decreases. When you work a knit two together, you enter the second stitch first. And if you did that here, that running bar would be on top. So that means we have to do an SSK. So we slip our stitch, we look at that running bar. Do we have to reposition it so it is leaning off to the left? So when we knit into the back, it's going to twist it closed. Do that now. And then you can SSK, get rid of that last bar. Check things right now because you can use the tip of your needle. You can move some of the excess yarn in that area maybe to the other stitches on either side. Then you can get rid of that marker. The only marker left now is the one at the underarm. We've done everything we can to close up the holes. So stop and have a look and see. Do you want to take out that last decrease and lift the bar, the second bar, and twist it, and then lift it over the first bar to close things up a little more? Do you want to try to use the tip of a needle to move some excess yarn to some other stitches and then do the decrease? This is the time to sort of diagnose what's happening at this point. Then when you're happy with how it looks, you can just start knitting the rest of your sleeve. So that is the whole process I like to do. I get my stitches back on their needle. I stop and I kind of look at that space between the cast on edge and the stitches that were on hold. And I see if I can remove any excess yarn. I use the tip of my needle and I sort of just try to move some of that excess to the stitches to either side and even it out, make that space a little bit smaller. Then I pick up those 2 running bars with the marker in the middle, pick up all my cast on stitches, placing a beginning of round marker, repeat for the other side, checking first, seeing if I can adjust the size of that space first, then picking up my bars, start the decreasing, and then we're ready to finish the sleeve. This is just one of the many topics that we cover in my group coaching program, Knits That Fit, where we take a top-down raglan and top-down yoke sweater. You can actually choose the pattern, and I walk you through how to choose the right size and make it fit your body really well and finish it really well with steps like this to minimize the holes at the underarm. And if you're interested in learning more about that program, I'll have a link down below and you can sign up for the waiting list and be the first to learn about the next group coaching session. I have other tips and advice on how to close up the gaps and the holes in those top-down seamless sweaters. Share your tips. If you're looking for advice, be sure and go check out those comments. Now I'm going to put together a playlist with some other videos all about those fine finishing details to really make your sweater look well finished. So you can click right there and I'll see you in the next video.